Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Supporting Digital Change in Your Community Legal Centre. My name's Carly Hanson and I'm a Capacity Building Lead at Community Legal Centres Queensland. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding today's webinar. In Meanjin, Brisbane, we're meeting on the lands of the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I wish to pay my deepest respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that these are stolen lands and that sovereignty was never ceded. As today's webinar is being viewed by people across Queensland and Australia, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners throughout the country and extend a very warm welcome to any First Nations people who are listening here today. So today we're really pleased to welcome our presenters from Minter Ellison, Ken Porter, Max Madden and Ricky Chompu, who will be talking to us today about digital change and taking us through some of the fantastic fact sheets that they've created for community legal centres to use, in particular as many of our centres are going through a period of tech change and CRM change in their organisations. So I'll hand over to Max, Ken and Ricky in just a moment and they can tell you a little bit more about themselves. But before I do that, just some quick housekeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded and we'll have the recording available to download later today or tomorrow. The PowerPoints have been emailed out and are also available to download from the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. So you can grab those now if you haven't had a chance to as yet. Of course, we encourage you to ask questions. Simply type your question into the question box on the control panel and we'll read your question out. We'll hold most questions to the end, but we might just pause in the middle and check in if any questions have come through at that point. But for now, I'll hand over to our presenters and I'll come back in at the end of the session. So I'm not sure who's taking it away first, Max or Ken or Ricky, but over to you, please. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Carly. So just confirming before I jump into it that I can be heard. Carly, I think you could probably validate that for me.
Yes, can hear you loud and clear. The PowerPoint was jumping around a bit there for a moment, but it seems to have settled on the first screen. So maybe just flick to the next slide and we'll check that that it is working. Fantastic. Thank you. We can see the acknowledgement. Thanks, Max.
Excellent. All right, thank you very much. So again, first and foremost, we would also, in conjunction with Community Legal Centres Queensland, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are holding this presentation, the Turrbal and Jagera people. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. As this presentation is being viewed throughout Queensland, we also pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and extend a warm welcome to any First Australians listening to this presentation. So, and again, thank you very much for having us here today, Carly. And I'm glad that you mentioned as well, because I was already thinking in my head about a joke related to technology consultants having tech issues, but I'm glad that they've now been resolved and we are on the call. So I'm conscious, obviously, that we have joined slightly late just due to those issues. So we will try and move throughout these topics probably slightly faster than initially expected. But for a bit of an overview around what we're going to be discussing today, we have the agenda here in front of us that we'll continue to work through. So initially, I do just want to call out a quick disclaimer that this presentation is intended for professional development and education purposes only. The information in this presentation is general in nature. It is not legal advice. However, it has been designed for lawyers and other staff working and volunteering in community legal centres setting in Queensland. This presentation and webinar is not to be published or reproduced for commercial purposes without the express permission of the authors. And the information in this presentation is current as of the 17th of July, 2024. So moving on to, I guess, who we've got on the call here today. So I won't spend a great deal of time going into our background and whatnot, but essentially, as Carly mentioned, there is myself, Max, Ken, and Ricky. So we're all with Minter Ellison. Myself and Ricky are part of the Minter Ellison Technology Consulting team and have a reasonable amount of experience supporting different organisations through major digital transformations in both a sort of on project and a supporting within a project office capacity Outside of that, myself and Ricky have some experience as well doing legal contracts automation and process automation, as well as benchmarking and commercial background. Ken is one of our leading and very experienced members of the automation and client solutions team, and he also has fairly extensive involvement with any of the more innovative and digital initiatives that are coming through on the legal side. So I guess we are a fit for purpose bunch to be talking to a group of people from legal centers about some technology change that they are about to undertake. So before I jump into the content, I do just quickly want to touch on the structure of this webinar. It's going to be broken down within each of the sections into 3 key stages, where initially we'll have some more informative content, which is that much more theoretical best practices sort of information. We will then try to reinforce and contextualize the information presented with some applied content, where we demonstrate the practical application of these concepts and practices on a hypothetical scenario. And then following that, we will have a bit of a summarization of what we've just discussed, and we'll open for a quick Q&A for roughly 3 to 5 minutes in between each of the 3 sections. The aim of this webinar today is ultimately to facilitate a means for you all to have a better understanding, if that is required, of the aspects of requirements gathering and requirements management when it comes to major technology change, as well as how to start to develop effective support channels and training strategies, and get insights into how risks and issues are managed within technology change environments. Why is this information important? The practices and the principles and concepts that we're going to touch on today are sort of consistent throughout the technology industry. The reason why these are so commonly used and there is such sophisticated and comprehensive information around them is because through a process of trial and error, it's been determined that this is a really effective way for organizations to ensure that the outcome that they have set out to achieve can be one that they actually end up with. And then how does that actually apply to your work? As you are all about to and all currently going through a major technology change, it's important that we give you information that can equip yourselves with tools and knowledge to better go about the different activities that you'll have to undertake over this period of time, such as managing and gathering those requirements, supporting your staff throughout this change with avenues for support and also training, and also during the change, better ways to go about managing any risks that you might encounter or issues that you experience whilst delivering these projects. So initially, we're going to start with requirements gathering and requirements management overall. So this is a very important and pivotal component of ensuring that a company can ultimately get the outcome that they like. Now, it may seem something that is quite routine. However, it's something that is commonly not done well. But there are some very basic practices that we can suggest that can really help ensure a high quality outcome when it comes to gathering and managing your requirements. And ultimately, why is it important to gather requirements? Gathering requirements is a crucial component of being able to understand what is actually needed by an organization to achieve its goals and ensure that the changes being made are effective and fit for their purpose. And the question there sort of asks, what requirements might we actually need to gather? And this is requirements that are by proxy of your organizational goals going to be needed to enable them. So things like, what are the technical requirements for any solutions that we need to roll out? Or what are the regulatory requirements we need to be conscious of when selecting solutions? What are our budgeting constraints? What are the different trends? Are there any cultural considerations, or do we need to consider the current skill sets and experience of our staff and determine if training is required? And then how can we use the gathered requirements to actually achieve that fit for purpose outcome? So as mentioned a couple of times there, being able to understand what your organization needs also means that you can understand what it does not need. It means that you can effectively evaluate the different options in front of you based on what it is that is critical to your success. It means that you can undertake cost-benefit analysis against the features that are being offered and the requirements or the features that you really, really need. It means that you can plan for scalability and future growth. You can assess the capabilities and support offered by the different vendors and ultimately plan for the change that's taking place. So as mentioned throughout this presentation, we will often introduce a bit of theoretical content and then try and reinforce that with a practical example. So the scenario or the hypothetical case study that we're going to be using throughout today is that of a coffee shop. So setting the scene, we have Sarah. Sarah is a coffee shop owner, and she needs to ultimately buy a new coffee machine to improve her service efficiency and meet the growing demand of her coffee shop. With increasing traffic, Sarah's current coffee machine, it can't keep up, unfortunately. It's creating long wait times, a lower quality in output, and it's frustrating her staff. Her concern is that if she doesn't go about replacing this machine, she's going to be unable to maintain the demand, and she's ultimately going to have diminishing customer satisfaction, ultimately resulting in loss of business. So her decision has been to go about in procuring and purchasing a coffee machine that is fit for what she needs. So noting that we know the current coffee machine is out of date and she needs to go and acquire a new one, it's important that she understands when I go and procure that new machine, what is it that will enable success based on what I need. So are there, again, any technical specifications? Are there any health and safety requirements? Is ease of use going to be important? Do I have specific budgeting constraints? And what is the process that Sarah can undertake to go about determining and defining what some of these requirements might be? So leading us into how does an organization actually go about gathering their requirements? The first and foremost, most important part about this is actually engaging with your staff. At the end of the day, a lot of the people that you work with are going to be on the ground and actually carrying out a lot of the critical business processes that will be potentially enabled by a solution or a process or a change that you're about to make in your organization. And a really effective way that a company can go about doing that is quite simple. It is through engaging them directly in focus groups and interviews in direct discussion, or facilitating a survey, which can be a bit more structured questionnaire to gather more quantitative data. Following engaging with the employees, once we've got that initial view of potentially what it is that we might need, or what are the pain points, or what are people saying, we then want to go forward and capture those key findings. We want to ensure that they are written down in a sort of standardized place that we can access. And then we want to take those captured findings and we want to translate them into a visual medium and communicate the understanding of the process or the mechanism within your business through visual tools such as a flowchart, a process map, diagrams, and other sort of visual mediums. So again, in the context of Sarah's coffee shop, how would she go about and use some of these principles to actually determine what it is that she needs? So she will go about a requirements workshop with her staff to understand what is it actually that goes into the specific processes carried out in our role. What are the pain points? What are things that are working or that are not working? So she will go through and carry out a basic question and answer or interview or group workshop style engagement. She'll ask them different questions. Can you take me through the process of making your coffee? What were the pain points? Are there any critical dependencies? And from that, she can then start to paint a picture of what it actually looks like. What is the entry and exit criteria of going about this process? So as we can see on the right, she's then taken the findings from that session. She's then converted them into a visual medium in a process map. And from there, we can start to actually visualize the different steps, any different dependencies. Are there any specific decisions that are made that change, the approach? And are there any pain points that we want to focus on and look to remove in whatever we choose moving forward as our new solution? So from there, we've gone about and we've captured our requirements as an organization. But then I guess the question is, how can we use this to actually achieve a fit for purpose outcome? So following the capturing and the visualizing of those requirements, it is really important to sort of re-engage with your stakeholders and actually validate, and then start to consider, is there any sort of prioritization within the requirements that we've captured? And so along the bottom there, you'll see just a very high level sort of example, but the purpose here is just to kind of facilitate the different stages that an organization will go through once they've gathered the requirements. So initially, they will have their requirements, they will go through and prioritize them and start to determine what is a critical requirement of our business. Are there things that we need versus things that we want? And then from there, we can use that to start to determine the feasibility amongst our different options. So is there a certain option that better suits us in one requirement and not another, or in all of the requirements? Are there ones that, you know, give us a lot of nice to haves, but don't quite fulfill really critical requirements that we have as a business? And from there, we can actually start to eliminate the unnecessary outcomes. And these can both be solutions or options that are offering more than what we need, potentially coming at a greater cost, or not offering what we need, therefore, you know, posing a bit of a risk in our ability to actually service our clients or, you know, our different operational requirements. And then again, bringing that into the context of the coffee shop, we've then gone through and we've captured our requirements. We've validated and prioritized them. And we've then gone through and determined a short list of solutions that we may want to work with or that we may want to pursue. So again, Sarah can compare the different features of each of the options against what she needs and what she doesn't need to determine what is going to be the most fit for the solution. She understands that her, you know, high-level requirements are, you know, it's a quick heat-up time for her coffee when making milk, that it's a efficient and easy-to-use steam wand, it's reliable and durable, and it can facilitate high volumes. So on the right there, she's gone through and she's put together a bit of a matrix view, which shows each of the different options, her requirements, and then the features that they provide, where green is indicating that this meets a requirement, yellow that it partially meets, or red that it does not meet. And from there, we can start to see that amongst those three options, one of them very clearly meets the requirements and could theoretically facilitate any of the, you know, needs and the demands that her business is going to bring. So noting those, I guess, three different components to the requirements gathering, from how do we actually go about capturing them, then how do we go about sort of visualizing them and then leveraging them, and then how do we go about using those to achieve a fit for purpose outcome, is essentially what we've covered here. And similarly, in the example of Sarah's coffee shop, she understood that, you know, her current product was not fit for purpose. She then went through and engaged her staff, went through and captured, visualized, validated, and prioritized the requirements, and then was able to use those requirements as a means to determine amongst the solutions which one is the most likely fit for purpose outcome for my organization and what it needs.
Max, maybe before we move to the next section, I might just jump in there. And everyone, this is Ken Porter from Minters. I've joined the session today. Max and Ricky have done a wonderful job of putting all this material together and also compiling these practical examples. I'd just like to share some practical anecdotes that we have experienced in our learnings of dealing with tech implementation and dealing with tech vendors that I think might be useful for you in your journey as you go forward. So with the requirements gathering that Max has covered here, I think for a lot of people it might seem like a fairly significant exercise to undertake, and you might be asking that question of this is something that we really need to do. And of course, I think there are always different levels when you do this, but maybe just a couple of things to consider. Max mentioned, it was captured in a slide, the process map approach that was taken even with Sarah's coffee shop. And I think that process map approach really cannot undervalue I guess the value that can bring to your process, not only to help you understand your requirements, but even going forward as a training tool and also as a change management tool. By capturing your process even at a high level with some of the detail around it, it allows you to make really informed decisions about actually what you do require from your technology. And it ensures that you're also, with those requirements, not what I would describe as vendor-led in your decisions. I think even in your personal lives, we probably all had that experience of making a purchase, whether it be small or large in your life, and then after the fact going, you know what, I didn't really need that functionality, or this actually doesn't really fit what I'm trying to do. The same can be said with your technology choices. Quite often a vendor will give you a demonstration of their tool, looks wonderful, which of course it will be in a demonstration, but then you apply it to your own scenario and you find that it's not necessarily performing as you expected or not meeting all the requirements that you, after the fact, might discover you have. So this exercise of going through and really identifying your requirements allows you to go into that discussion with a tech vendor and say, this is what I need, this is what I don't need. How does your solution service that requirement for me? It also will help you inform future changes. So when new requirements come up, whether that be within your own organization or from other organizations that you deal with or from your clients, you can refer back to your process map, to your requirements list, and say, okay, if I capture that, how does it change what I need to do? How does it change the way we use the technology? And that can then kind of prompt an action for you to engage with the tech vendor to say, how do we implement this? Or even make considerations around what other technology needs you might have to supplement your change in requirements. So really valuable exercise. Back to you, Max.
Thanks, Ken. And yeah, just to touch on that, I completely agree. It's really important to have that understanding, even if it's at a high level, of what it is that you need. Because at the end of the day, I guess we don't know what we don't know. And it's impossible to know what we don't need if we don't even initially know what it is exactly that we need. And quite commonly, as Ken said, through things like the solution demonstrations and some of the initial responses when undergoing procurement, sometimes solutions can look amazing on the surface, but some of the really crucial things that you need as an organization may not be facilitated in what it is that they're offering you. Or alternatively, you may be paying for things that you also don't need, like within your support model or through specific features. So going through and really understanding what it is that you require as an organization can go a really long way in making the right decision when choosing, different options or solutions. And so I guess just before I move to the next section, Carly, I'm happy to spend a minute or two here if there has been any questions come through in the chat.
Thanks, Max and Ken. No, nothing so far. So please carry on with the presentation.
Excellent. So moving into the next section, we're going to be briefly covering training and support strategies for undergoing organizational change relating to technology. So this may seem, again, quite straightforward and simple, but again, it's something that's really important to get right. And so initially starting with training, I guess, why is it important ultimately to develop a fit for purpose strategy? Oh, sorry, has this screen just closed? Sorry, I just had one of my screens.
We're just on 2.1 training strategies for tech change. So it seems to be working, but you are flicking between two screens at the moment. So just back on the right screen now, maybe just hang there.
All good, no worries. Excellent, sorry. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really important to go about and define and actually develop a fit-for-purpose training strategy. It's going to enable a smooth transition. It's going to result in enhanced employee competence once that training is rolled out, in consistency and ensuring that you meet your compliance requirements. It will ultimately give you a means to support continuous improvement. But at the end of the day, when you don't go about and do this effectively, it means that you're ultimately going to have a less productive start when you do roll out that change. There may be a constant process of pivoting and trying to relearn, in trying to address issues that could have been addressed earlier on, and it's going to ultimately lower morale and impact the sentiment of your broader stakeholder group and your staff. But it's good to note that there is some basic steps that an organisation can go through to actually develop an effective training program, and it's through a 5-step model, which I will cover in further detail on the following slide. So as mentioned, creating an effective training strategy for technology change involves a bit of a systematic approach to ensure all users are equipped with the necessary skills and knowledge to facilitate the requirements of their job after the change. These 5 key steps will assist in putting together a comprehensive training plan that facilitates smooth transitions and maximizes the benefits of your new technology. And so initially, this is, again, similar to requirements gatherings, ultimately assessing your training needs. And so this can be done through a number of different ways, but it's ultimately a bit of a requirement gathering process, again, to understand what is going to change between how it is now and how it will be after the major changes occurred. When this change occurs, is there going to be different requirements from a skills, capabilities, and experience perspective? Are we going to need to uplift specific knowledge areas of our staff to ensure that they are adequately equipped to take this change and begin achieving, realizing the full value that it can bring? So I guess once we've actually gone through and identified what the needs are of our staff, it's important that we go and develop a training plan. So creating a bit of a comprehensive view that outlines the key objectives, the overall approach, and the timelines of our training strategy. And so this can be things such as, are we going to facilitate training through online, so that way we can have more, remote people join, or do we have a predominantly remote workforce? Is it going to be in-person sessions? Is it going to be virtual modules? And what does the training schedule actually look like? So it's important that this is clear and measurable, and everyone can easily understand what this process is going to look like. From there, once we know at a higher level anyway what we need to do when it comes to training, and ultimately the plan in which we are going to go about approaching it, we can also then start to select the specific mediums and content, or experiences that we want our staff to have when actually going about learning these different skills or capabilities. And so this can be specifically selecting a learning module for more theoretical knowledge, or maybe it will be sort of on-the-job professional training and mentoring. And then through that as well, are we going to need to schedule refresher courses? Are we going to need to set up more simulation or hypothetical style scenarios for people to mimic real life? And then from there, once we have an understanding of what we need to do, how we're going to go about it, and what it is specifically we are going to do, it's important that throughout this process that stakeholders are always engaged, both from the on the ground perspective and at the senior level. It's important that from delivery teams through business unit leaders and management, that everyone is at least somewhat aligned on how we are going to go about training and what the requirements are for them and for their team or for their area of business. And then as we progress through the training strategy within the schedule, it's important that we do continuously evaluate the training effectiveness, whether this is through feedback forms or more monitoring-based performance assessment, or even post-training observations. It's imperative that we go through and we understand, was this successful? Do our staff feel like they're now equipped to go about and carry out this change and be, I guess, appropriately equipped with what they need to be able to then go about doing their job essentially once the change has occurred? So the other thing is within training and within the specific how we are actually going to go about training our staff and what are the different mediums, a really common approach is to use a tiered training program. So below, we've got some high-level information again around what are the sort of 3 pillars for tiered training programs as an example, and some best practices. And so this involves, I guess, different tools like training the trainer. So, identifying subject matter expertise with deep system knowledge to train them in an advanced capacity on specific, I guess, technical things within the ultimately the part of the business that is going to change. Providing comprehensive resources and encouraging them to then go forth and collaborate among the trainers to then ultimately provide a more effective training program. We also may need to consider role-based training, so grouping different scope of training against the different roles or the different areas of the business, and then from there developing tailored training programs with scenarios that mimic the different experiences that these different areas of the business are going to have when this change actually takes place. And then also alternatively deep dive modules. So I guess there's more theoretical based training, or it's being done through a major platform, or it is a major vendor who may have a lot of I guess IP available for purchase as well that can facilitate training. This may be another means to go about getting your staff the information they need. And so again, consistent with the first section, we're going to be carrying on with the coffee shop scenario, and still in the context of Sarah's new coffee machine. So in this scene, or in this case here, the coffee machine has now been procured. It hasn't arrived yet, but it is on the way, and it is on track to be implemented. So Sarah needs to ensure that her staff ultimately have the appropriate skills and experience to be able to use this machine from day one and continue business. So similar to, as we mentioned before, with that 5-step process, she's gone through and assessed the different training needs for her staff. Is it, simply the using of the new coffee machine? Is it potentially the maintenance of that coffee machine? Is it going to be, I guess, is she going to go about this through surveying the baristas, or, observing them on a day-to-day basis to identify where there's pain points in making coffee? From there, she goes through and develops a training plan, identifying things like, some of my baristas don't have formal accreditation, and it's really important that, in parallel to this change, that I also address this. Maybe it's going to be through selecting specific virtual modules for the new coffee machine that cover things like maintenance, and then putting forward a timeline so that way she can complete the training, at least in part, at the time in which the machine is implemented. So again, choosing different training methods for different reasons. So the learning modules for specific machine maintenance, she may have on-the-job training with a third-party and accredited barista trainer where they come in on site and train the staff with the new machine. Then as the training schedule, I guess, progresses, she will continue to engage with her staff, ensuring that from the baristas to the senior barista to the day manager, everyone feels as if they are, I guess, learning what it is that they need, that the training is effective, and that they can have the forum to be able to call out where they believe there are any gaps. And then as it's continuing on, it's important that Sarah does evaluate the training effectiveness through either gauging feedback or through doing observations of the different baristas making coffees to observe whether or not some of the earlier identified pain points have actually now been addressed through this training. And in conjunction with training, another imperative pillar of ensuring that your staff is supported, both prior to change and during the process of and after change, is ensuring that there is a fit for purpose channel that they can go through to get support and also access additional resources. So providing effective support channels, is ultimately is ensuring that the various support channels and resources available to staff is ensuring that there are resources and channels available to staff post-training. It's important to ensure that there is ongoing support provided through either help desks, online resources, or specifically established peer support systems to ensure that if there is any challenges that are faced through the process of this change, they can be adequately supported. It's important as well that this support is able to scale for growth. So some things to consider in there is, what is the long-term potential demand looking like? Is it expected that we are going to have considerably different volumes? Is there potentially a specific event or regulatory requirement which is going to, over time increase the demand on our business, and ensuring that we can continually scale and always provide support regardless of, the operational volumes that are taking place. And then additionally, in terms of extra tips, it's important that, if possible, that there is interactive tools to provide instant support and guidance for staff learning new systems. That again, there is those established peer support groups where staff can share different tips and best practices, as well as have a sort of safe environment to be able to access help, potentially with someone they are already familiar with. It's important that there's regular updates to staff on the available resources and the new material. And that there is a centralized repository for the support resources, guides, FAQs, and any other information relating to the change. And additionally, a final point which I've touched on here is establishing a channel to be able to manage SLAs or the service level agreement. So ensuring that outside of the support that you can provide internally or that you can acquire through third parties such as resources and modules, that there is also a direct channel to the vendor to be able to get support as required when, I guess, the support that is needed is out of scope of something that can be given internally. So again, looking at how that looks from a practical perspective when it comes to the coffee shop. So again, Sarah's coffee shop is about to be implemented, and before it arrives, Sarah does need to ensure that her team has a clear way to get assistance and access additional support as required. Having defined a clear channel for her staff to get help will ensure that they continuously are able to address any challenges that arise during this change. So in the context of Sarah's coffee shop, it may be a day-to-day person who is a bit of a subject matter expert that the staff feel comfortable going to for help. And in this case, it's Emily. She's a senior barista. She's gone through and received a specialized training and now has a deep understanding of the new coffee machine. So when the new machine is implemented, Emily will be able to act as that subject matter expert and manage any of the day-to-day support requirements that her staff may have, and also as well as implement a simple issue tracking system for baristas to be able to log and work with Emily for those problems. As well as, it's important that there are additional resources provided that can further support the change, whether this is an online repository of things like videos and documents and artifacts relating to the new coffee machine, or alternatively, ensuring there is a general and accessible knowledge base, which is easy to navigate, so that way the baristas can find answers to the questions they have about the new machine. And again, establishing a clear channel for engaging the vendor for additional support. Because at the end of the day, there is a lot of, I guess, efforts that can be made to ensure that internally, all of the available resources are there for staff to, go and consume, that there is people that are skilled and knowledgeable and people can access for specific support, but sometimes as well, there is support that is required that is not going to be provided by anyone internally. And it's important, again, that you have a clear avenue to be able to engage with and liaise with the vendor, as well as a clear understanding of the requirements of your contract and the service levels that they are to adhere to when providing this support. So in summary, some of the key takeaways here is ultimately that it's really important to have in place an effective and appropriate training strategy that is going to prepare your employees to be able to navigate change and manage challenges as they arise. That, I guess, when going about developing this training strategy, we followed a process similar to the 5 steps, and we know that, I guess, we understand the requirements and how we're going to address those, what are the different mediums in which those can be addressed, and what are the other components of the training model. As well as with the support channels, that it's important to ultimately have an avenue for your staff to be able to get help, both internally when it comes to day-to-day, or digitally when it comes to specific knowledge resources, or externally when it comes to directly with the vendor for things that can't be managed by staff. And again, similar with the practical example, Sarah went through and leveraged that 5-step process. She developed an effective training process. She was then able to implement that training program and establish who those various people that work within her staff that were available for support, and also identified the appropriate approach to being able to engage with the coffee machine vendor for when support can't be managed internally.
Just a quick anecdote to share around training and support. So I just really wanted to highlight the importance of considering the role of an SME from within your own organisation in training and support. A vendor will always offer probably a fairly comprehensive training program and of course ongoing support, which should take up. But in our experience, having an SME within your own business can be a real benefit. Think of it this way: think of training as not about how do we use this technology, but more about how do we perform our work or deliver our services using this technology. If you think of it that way, an SME who understands your business and how work is performed in your business is probably going to be best suited to provide a lot of that training and support. So a good vendor will train the trainer, as I think Max referred to on one of the slides, train the trainer so that person becomes a champion for that platform within the business. And they can be the first point of call, obviously for training for your people, but also support when there might be questions that are asked before there's a need to engage the vendor. So really important to consider the role of the SME within your business.
Excellent, thanks, Ken. Carly, I know that I've left a little section in here for Q&A, but I might say we hold that until the end, just noting what the time is, and I'll continue through with risks and issues, and then we can open the floor for the last couple of minutes for questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. The screen is still jumping around, so I'm not sure what you're seeing, but maybe just limit the amount of movement once you get onto the slide, because it is flicking with 2 slides per screen sometimes. Yep, like now.
Okay. Oh, okay. It's not showing that on our end, so my hands are off keyboard and mouse, so I'm not too sure.
Okay.
It's still doing it now?
Yeah, I can see 2 slides on the screen, but if you just, we'll just bear with it and take us to the slide that you're around risk management, we'll move on from there.
Okay. And I guess confirming, is this still showing 2 slides here?
No, just 1 at the moment, thanks.
All right, excellent. And this sort of brings us to our last component here. This is, I guess, the management of risks and issues. Now, again, managing risks and issues is probably not a concept that is foreign to most people on the call. However, there is some specific practices in the context of technology change that are important to consider when you determine how it is that you're going to go about managing risks and issues. So at the end of the day, why is it actually important to manage risks and issues? It ensures ultimately that your project is staying on track, that it is within budget, it's within schedule, and it's able to meet its goals. It means that you can ultimately effectively manage those risks to ensure that you can detect problems early and in advance. You can reduce possible delays, you can minimize the additional expenses that occur when problems do arise, and ultimately ensure a higher quality outcome as opposed to when risks and issues aren't managed effectively, it can commonly result in delays to your timeline, to additional costs, to reduced quality, to disruption in your operations, and ultimately stakeholder dissatisfaction. So it's important to note that, again, this is going to feel quite elementary, but it's something that is commonly not done well in a lot of organizations, particularly even ones with high levels of maturity. But I guess it's ultimately what actually is a risk and what actually is an issue. And again, I'm going to assume most people do generally know what a risk and issue is, but just to sort of revisit it, a risk is an event or a condition that might occur in the future and could negatively impact the project. So thinking about it as a what-if scenario. And then as opposed to an issue is a problem that has already happened and needs to be fixed. So thinking of it as something that's already caused trouble and must be dealt with right away. And the relationship between the two is that a risk that goes about unmanaged will likely at a point in time turn into an issue. So how do we actually go about managing risks when it comes to technology projects? So a key component of being able to manage a risk is actually being able to classify what that risk is and determine what the appropriate course of action is based on that classification. So the two really key metrics that are commonly used throughout, I guess, technology project offices or through technology change is impact and likelihood, where risk impact looks to determine the severity of the consequences on the project if the risk occurs, and the likelihood assesses the probability that this risk will actually happen. So as you can see here, there is two tables on the left and the right with some categorizations for impact and likelihood and some basic descriptions around them. So based on the combination of the impact and the likelihood, we can determine from there what we actually need to do to manage this risk. Is this something we need to do as an immediate priority? Does it dictate the level of, I guess, focus that it needs, the amount of mitigation that needs to take place, and whether or not we need to ultimately escalate it? So below, I've included a high-level approach to actually being able to manage the risks, which goes across 6 different key steps. Initially from identify, which is at the point where the risk is actually noticed. Then from there, analyze, which is where we go through and we consider what this risk is. What is the impact if this were to occur, and what is the likelihood of this occurring? From there, we can dictate how we actually want to go about mitigating this. What is the strategies or the actions that need to take place to ensure this doesn't occur? Who is the owner of this risk and who is going to be responsible for monitoring and mitigating it? Then what is the cadence at which we do want to actually monitor and report on this risk? And in the event of us being unable to manage and mitigate, how do we go about escalating this risk through the relevant channels? So similarly again with the coffee shop scenario, an example that we've used here is the coffee shop machine is about to be implemented. The day before the machine is installed, Ben, the barista, notices an electricity supply issue within the wall port. Ben is a bit concerned that if this port were to short circuit when the new machine has been in use, that it could actually damage the new machine and potentially impact the coffee shop's ability to service customers, which would ultimately result in a loss of income, reduced customer satisfaction, and potentially additional costs to replace the machine. So going through that same approach, Ben's identified that there was a problem with the circuit within that port. He's then gone through and he's classified the impact and likelihood of that risk. He's then determined that a second power port is nearby, and this could be used for the coffee machine with an extension cord. Now, Ben, being a barista and being the one who identified it, he notifies his team that he's going to be taking ownership for ensuring that this is mitigated. He then continues to monitor the power port with the extension cord in the interim until an electrician can arrive. And in the event that this is unresolved at the point in which the coffee machine is being implemented, he'll ultimately need to escalate this to Sarah. And so similarly to risks, we also have a similar approach to actually managing issues, where different to the 2 different metrics that we use for risks, in the context of issues, it is severity and priority. Although similar, there is some difference between them, where severity measures the impact of the issue on this project, and the priority determines the urgency of resolving the issue. Again, below there are some categorizations and descriptions how one might go about classifying this and what the different classifications mean. But then moving on to the bottom section, we again have a similar high-level approach to the management of issues, where again, it goes from identify to then logging the issue in a register or a tracker, having a person within the business, likely one who in which is most impacted by the issue, is an owner of, and then that owner is responsible for implementing solutions to fix the issue, ultimately evaluating if the solutions implemented have been effective in addressing the issue and determining whether or not this is something that needs to be escalated. And so again, similarly, in the same scenario of the coffee shop, the machine has been implemented and the barista notices that the milk temperature is quite low. Sally's concerned that is an issue with the milk frother, that this could impact the quality of the coffee and ultimately reduce customer satisfaction and have lost it on future business. So again, similarly, Sally identifies the problem, she logs it after classifying it, although Sally is unfamiliar with the technical components of the Stream 1. So in this scenario, she determines that Ben is the best person to take ownership. Ben then goes through, works to resolve it, review it, and then ultimately at the point in which this can't be resolved, he would be escalating and contacting Sally to reach out to the manufacturer through the established support channels. So in closing, just touching on across the different concepts within risks and issues, that ultimately it is really important to go about managing your risks and issues in a consistent way that is understood by all those who are involved with the change. It's important to have a proactive approach so that way we can identify risks before they turn into issues, that we can ultimately look to minimize the disruption and maximize the quality through effectively managing risks and issues before they do, ultimately impact the work that we're doing, and build confidence throughout our organization that, we're being transparent and doing our due diligence when it comes to managing these items. So cautious of time here now, as it is 2:59. So Carly, if there was still time for questions, I'm more than happy to open it up to the floor now and answer any questions that anyone did have. But alternatively, let me know if we are running short on time.
Great, thank you so much. Good work bringing it in on time. So I will open it up for questions. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat box. Feel free to ask any question. Now is your opportunity when we've got some tech experts in the virtual room with us who can help answer those questions. Nothing has come through yet, so we'll just, if there's any final words you wanted to say or a few other tips and tricks just while those questions come in, please feel free.
Charlie, maybe whilst we're waiting,
yeah.
Just a quick anecdote on risks and issues. A good vendor is going to help you manage and define both, but in our experience, vendors will typically be more concerned with issues, and the reason for that is issues are the now, and particularly issues that occur during implementation. So you might need to think about risks from the context of taking responsibility for those risks and consider risks are things, as Max said, that will happen in the future. So really looking at risks to understand what those future risks might be that could be not necessarily caused by the system, but system related, but also related to how you perform the work. Doing what Max said around that classification of really prioritising those risks, which also then helps inform the kind of actions you take if those risks occur and prepares you for those risks. So if a vendor says, don't worry, we'll take care of it all for you, we've got the issues sorted, don't just think, okay, we're cool, we can move on. Do take a step back and have to think about what those risks are from your own organisation's perspective and capture those.
Great.
And I think in adding to that as well, a really, really excellent example across the three different key concepts discussed today, from requirements gathering to that training and channel management, and then through to the management of risks and issues, is something you might identify through the requirements gathering process as a really, really critical requirement of your solution or your option. Maybe initially fulfilled by the vendor. You may go through and select that option or that solution under the assumption that this requirement is ultimately going to be met. But then throughout the process of the implementation, it may come to fruition that there is going to be an issue with the delivery of this requirement. So this is something that in advance of that being implemented, we would immediately want to raise as a risk. And then if it's not something that could be addressed, we would then actually want to access and leverage the established channels for getting support from our vendor to go through and escalate this risk. So all of the different concepts today all do have, I guess, a lot of dependency and sort of involvement on each other. but that was just I guess a hypothetical example. So I can see that a question has come through here regarding, I guess, practical suggestions for creating process maps. So I guess when it comes to creating process maps, outside of, I guess, the content covered in today's session and also in the handouts that were given, I think the best practical suggestions or the best advice that I could give, particularly if it's not something that I guess your organization or the people taking part in it are familiar with, is initially keep it simple. It doesn't need to look perfect, but I think it's a really effective way to be able to summarize and communicate the information that I guess you've uncovered through that requirements gathering in a consistent way that different stakeholders can look at it, they can consume it, and they can quickly understand and infer the different components or where the different requirements come out. So be it through tools like PowerPoint even, or through Visio or other free tools on the internet, there is a lot of great, I guess, options available at sometimes free to low cost to be able to go through and create those visualizations, be it in a flowchart or a process map. I guess outside of that, Ken, was there anything that I guess came to mind when it, relating to any practical suggestions you could give to people creating process maps?
Yeah, sure. So I think one, I'd mention that sometimes in our experience working with lawyers and suggesting that we're going to put a process map together, we often get the response that, oh no, you can't map our process. It's different every time. It's different for every client. It's different for every matter. And we acknowledge that certainly the actual outcome of the task or the output or the deliverable, yes, is bespoke and changes each time, but the high level process stays the same. So to be able to sit down, start at a really high level, what we often call it a side pocket. I won't go into the detail of that, but that's capturing really high level stage gates, if you like. What are the different stages of our process? And then under each of those stages, you can go to different levels of detail. You might capture every single task. What's the task? Who performs it? What systems are used? How long does that task take? And how much time elapses before the next task? That's going into the kind of nth level of detail that we'll sometimes do, particularly if we're trying to identify opportunities for improvement, because that helps us identify where the bottlenecks in that process might exist. And the other benefit of that, what we find is you'll also find that it becomes a really effective training tool. I can't really tell you the number of times I've sat in a workshop with legal teams. We've put brown paper up on the wall, we've used post-it notes, we've scribbled on them, we've captured the whole process in detail step to step. And at the end of the day, everybody sits back and they look at it and they go, wow, that's our process. Didn't realize there was so many steps. I didn't even realize that you or another person in the room did that task. And very often we get asked, can we capture that in a format by which we can use it for training purposes? Because we've never captured our process before. So as Max said, even if you do that, obviously a lot of the lawyers are familiar with Microsoft Word. Word, a little bit clunky. Do it in Word, do it in Excel as a starting point. Certainly can create a visual process map in PowerPoint or in Visio, but any way that you can capture that detail, I think can be a real benefit and really helps create transparency for everybody across your team in terms of how your process is actually performed. Really beneficial.
Agreed. And I think just, oh, sorry, do you want to jump in there, Carly?
No, you're fine.
No, that's all good. I was just going to add a sort of additional note to that. Is it also gives you a really, I guess, great basis for if at the point where the change does occur, this process is going to look slightly different, or there is a new dependency that wasn't previously there, or the addition of another task that's going to need to take place. It obviously gives you a bit of a baseline to then go through and make those little updates, and then in a sort of current versus future comparison, clearly communicate, I guess, the specific parts of this process that now may be changed as a result of this change. But look, other than that, that was just an additional item I was going to add. Carly, I'll pass back to you there.
Great. Thank you so much for your input on that. I think it's a really valuable tip to, start with your own organisation's processes and map those out clearly, and then use that to inform your case management system or your client management system or any other technology product that you are thinking of implementing in your centre, rather than being led by the technology itself. I guess some other things to think about their sort of client journey mapping, which is a little bit similar, and some organisations may have had experience using that as well, and sort of thinking about what your current state is, but also what your ideal sort of mapping might look like, and then sort of using that to inform your IT strategy and systems as well. Look, we are at 3:10, and I'm mindful of everyone's time, so no other questions have come through, but if people on the line do think of any other questions, feel free to email those through, and we'll be able to forward them on to the team at Minters. But for now, I will say thank you to our excellent presenters and to everyone for joining in, for your questions, and for your patience at the beginning of the presentation. So big virtual round of applause for Ken, Max and Ricky from Minters. And some lovely comments coming through saying thank you. We will soon close down this webinar, but you'll see on your screen once I do close the session that there'll be a short review survey for people to complete. So I ask that you do please complete that if you can. That will help inform our future webinar program here at Community Legal Centres Queensland. So with that, I'll say bye for now, and look forward to seeing everyone at our next CLCQ webinar. Thanks everyone. See you later. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Carly.